Mountain Blade 2 has 6 kingdoms to choose from, and within those 6 are a smattering of units that you'll be training from lowly recruit all the way to their tier 5 Giga Chadley goodness. In this video today, I want to reboot an older series I did during the early access of Bannerlord and review the entire unit tree of each respective kingdom. Today we'll be focusing on the Empire. This is of course not a guide of min-maxing, but a means of giving you an idea of how well a specific kingdom's soldiers stack up against other soldiers of a similar rank. I'll be assigning each unit a rating of low, mid, or high. This way you'll be able to get an idea for how well that unit performs compared to its peers based off of the use case. Perhaps the skills and weapons all over the place, making it a low grade unit. Or maybe it has the best of the best across the board, making it that high grade Charles. You can quickly navigate to any tier of soldier by using the chapters in both the timeline and the description. As always guys, if you end up enjoying the content though, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Each one of those things helps out any content creator you watch in a huge way to aid in combating the dreaded YouTube algorithm. And I don't know why I said that like William Shatner. There's something on the wing. But let's get started here on the Empire or Imperial Unit Guide for Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord. Starting us off at Tier 2, we have the Imperial Infantryman. And Tier 2 is kind of interesting because everyone else's Tier 2 soldiers have been so well upgraded, but some of the ones that were great in the past, the infantrymen used to be a nice high rating, have really kind of fallen to the wayside. And if I look at their skill sets, 40 athletics, one-handed, and polearm, and it doesn't have a polearm. That's unfortunate. But if I compare it to a footman, it still has way better armor and has a polearm. And the funny thing is the footman's got polearm skill as well. If I compare it to the Sturgian warrior, which we talked about in our Sturgian video, it has the same skills, better armor, and even though it has that wasted polearm slot. So I don't think it's a low rating like the warrior and the footman, only because its armor kind of saves the day. It just barely squishes it into that mid class, with the clan warrior and the tribesman being above it. Also, let's take a look at the Volandian footman, who I forgot, because he also has a polearm. So those are some things worth considering, that I think that the infantryman stays in the mid class because he can actually stay alive to push into tier 3 easier than the lower rank ones below him. And even the Khazate one has a use case in, say, trying to get manual laborers for that quest in specific. So the Imperial Infantryman sits now at a mid, fallen from its high rank of before. The Imperial Archer, there's no other tier 2 archer, so it stays at a nice high rank. It's got a hunting bow, which is tier 1. It's fine. It's tier 2. Who cares? Range arrows are fine. Whatever. It's tier 2. It's got no competition. There's no other rank 2 archer. Khazate comes in at rank 3. Same thing with Asterai. Same thing with Sturgia. So the Imperial Archer stays that high rank. It just has 40 bow, 40 athletics, 40 one-handed, so it's just going to do what it does. Its armor's kind of not great, but it's still actually pretty good compared to other tier 2 soldiers that are on foot. 12 body armor is better than both the Sturgian and the Khazate infantry soldier. So to recap here, mid-rank on the infantryman and a high rank on the archer. With tier 3, we get the Imperial Trained Infantryman, and we still don't get a polearm, which is unfortunate. Looking at this though, we still get 70 athletics, 70 one-handed, and 70 throwing. In fact, you'll find that across the board, even into the Veteran Infantryman and Legionary, we really don't get a polearm. We get a pilum, which is really not a polearm. It's really not a throwing weapon either. It's kind of a weird middle ground thing. I get it, why it's there thematically, but if we're talking about the Byzantine era, they didn't use, never mind. Going into this, we get a character that does not have a polearm, like I said. Compared to its counterparts though too, its armor is not amazing, and that used to be the Imperial strong point, because its spearmen's got better armor, the Sturgian soldiers got much better armor, the Volandian spearman does not have better armor. The Volandian spearman just not having it. The trained warrior just barely doesn't have as good an armor, and the footman doesn't have it as well. But the footman though has a spear. The footman has a mace, so it can threaten upwards. The trained warrior is about comparable, I'd say, to the Imperial Trained Infantryman, just has a polearm. So the Trained Infantryman though, not having a polearm, still though has simple javelins. And to be fair, if I'm talking about an actual infantry engagement, I like javelins over polearms. If I'm thinking about being charged by horses, I'm not as stoked about javelins. That being said, though, I still think that the trained infantryman stays with that mid playing field because of those throwing arms, those javelins, and playing alongside with the rest of the army, having access to ranged units early will help out with dealing with any kind of horse archers. Having a really strong eventual shock cavalry unit will help out with screening against cavalry charges. In a cav on cav situation, it's really nice. So I actually really like javelins, especially when you use it against other infantry at tier 3. It can really help soften infantry soldiers up. It's what makes the Asarai veteran infantry soldier the best infantry soldier in my opinion as of the making of this video, because those javelins soften them up for the big blow of the charge in. So I still kind of keep these guys at mid, even though they do kind of change quite a bit, and their armament has changed quite a bit. They used to have a really strong armor at this point. They don't have that anymore. But moving into the trained archer, we have a character with only 1 stack of arrows. That is unfortunate. Looking at the light archer, we get 2 stacks of arrows here. Looking at both of the hunters, the Khazad hunter has 1 stack of arrows, step arrows though with 24. And then with the Sturgian hunter, we are getting access to 2 stacks of arrows and a really good bow skill. So comparing the Imperial trained archer to this, we get a bow skill of 70. We get a mountain hunting bow, which is comparable, and then just simply barbed arrows. So if I'm looking at that, I think that they unfortunately kind of stack in with the Khazad hunter, who has a simple short bow. So 56 damage compared to the 46 damage of the mountain hunting bow. I definitely put the Imperial trained archer as a low rank now, because their armor, I mean, it's okay, it's good and survivable, but they only have 20 arrows compared to everyone else having bare minimum 24 arrows, and their bows not being great. 46 damage on this guy compared to this one doing 45, but at least he's going to have a whole set of extra arrows. This guy's got the 56 damage simple short bow. This dude's got the 46 damage mountain hunting bow, but again, it's going to have 2 sets of arrows. So we can still do more. He can at least actually do damage as an archer. So I put the trained archer as a low. Recapping here, we have a mid rating on the Imperial trained infantry with a low on the trained archer. With tier 4, things get pretty spicy here. We have a lot of options to choose from, and they're pretty fun. So the Imperial veteran infantryman is our first character to look at, and he is very tanky. He's got a really good armor piece, 3818. Great armor at 20, but then just low leg armor, just like everyone else in class has at 6, except for the Sturgian Spearman. Good headpiece, great shoulders, and then a good fine steel paramirian, which gives really good swing damage of 72, a great shield, and then the weird pilum. His skills, 100, 100, 100, are great, but I still think that pilum is fucking weird, man. It just weirds me out every time I see it. Also has a really great alternate ornate legionary scale mail, which just looks awesome. The unit itself looks really, really cool. I give these guys a mid rank though, because by comparison, they're very similar to the Pick Warrior. The Pick Warrior though has better skills, a little bit better situations on some of its other pieces here. The Spear Infantry here, 100, 100, 100, very similar stuff across the board too as well, but it's not quite as bad as the Swordsman, which is a low rating, or the Sturgian Spearman, which is a high rating, which just has way better armor, a nice good spear. And that's one of the things, is the Spear Infantry has a better spear. The Picked Warrior has a better spear. The Asarai Infantry has a better spear and can throw things. So I think that the veteran infantryman being in this weird place with this pilum is kind of unfortunate. I think that this just needs to either be a throwing weapon and we go back to making these a throwing soldier, or the veteran infantryman just gets an actual spear like they would be like historically in that around that time period of the Eastern Roman Empire. So that kind of gives me a mid-rank for them. Now the Manavliaton is a really fun one. It is a very tanky two-handed shock infantry soldier. The Manavlian is a really, really, really good weapon here. It's going to be doing some ton of swing damage and just punching into things. Now its competition is stuff like the Falksmen, which are also really good now. The armor though on the Manavliaton is just really, 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 really strong. We also have the Line Breaker, who used to be best in class in this situation, but has kind of fallen to the wayside because of all the armor and the skill upgrades and the class upgrades across, and the AI upgrades across the board to all of these characters that now fit into this location. Do Asarai Guard. Oh no, it's Monmouth Guard. Whoopsies. There we go. These guys, man, I love these guys. 100 two-handed, 110 athletics, 100 throwing, with comparable armor to the Manavliaton, who just is a gilded tank, man. 31.66, 26. We got 36 in the head. We got 310.8 on this guy. Manavlian, the Fine Steel Spatha, but has 100 athletics, one-handed, and pole arm. I think that these guys used to have a very kind of funky placement in not just like the army, but also the way that they would actually function. You'd have to really use them in a particular way. But now you can actually have them in the front line and they'll survive because of their armor and their capabilities to actually do a lot of damage. So I still think the Manavliaton retains its high ranking compared to the other bros in its slot. I think everyone else is a mid, if not high. And I've already kind of gone over this. I don't think there's really anyone in this. Oh, well, yeah, there is. Yeah, there is. There's a low. It's right here. It's the Billman. I hate the Billman. But the Manavliaton definitely kind of retains that high ranking. Into our now veteran archer. The veteran archer is in a funky place. It's still a low rating. But what's unfortunate here is that compared to every other tier 4 archer, he only gets 1 stack of arrows. So that sucks. On top of it, his bow is... I mean, it's not terrible because you have a Nordic short bow on the Sturgian archer with 52 pierce damage. This guy's got 62. It's unfair. That's such a good bow. But the Astrai archer has a simple short bow with 56 pierce. And then the Imperial veteran archer has that same bow with 56 pierce, but only barbed arrows and only 1 stack of them, and only has 100 bow. Everyone else has 100 bow except for the Khazate has 110, but he doesn't make up for it in any other way across the character. His armor is still the worst. If you compare Sturgia, and if Sturgia has better armor than you in an archer position, man, that's pretty rough. So the veteran archer's survivability is low. His damage output is low. His damage capacity is low. The only thing I guess you could make the argument here is he has the highest availability of any archer because Imperial recruits are the most plentiful recruits in the game. So that's, I guess, worth noting, but he definitely falls into that low position. The last tier 4 unit is the Imperial Crossbowman, which compares to the Volandian Hardened Crossbowman. And it does have far better armor. The infantry mail vest, all these things, really great survivability, which is nice. Light crossbow is tier 4 with light quarrels being a 1 damage pierce weapon with the Spatha. Also noting it's got 100 athletics, one-handed, and 100 polearm. But comparing it to the Hardened Crossbowman, which gets a massive Pavis on his shield, as well as a Hickory crossbow, which is a tier upgrade, and bolts, which have 3 more damage in the pierce section, it's no competition. The Hardened crossbow is better. I don't think, though, that the Imperial Crossbowman is terrible. I almost kind of feel like he does a better job than the veteran archer because he'll just be able to do more damage by virtue of the fact that he has a light crossbow over an bow and arrow. He still has 2 less shots than the veteran archer, so there's that to consider. But I mean, honestly, now I feel like I used to always go to Palatine Guard. I feel like now I would more than likely go to Imperial Sergeant Crossbowmen because they're very strong. But I'm going to give the Imperial Crossbowman a mid-rank because the Hardened Crossbowman from Volandia is just that much better. So a quick recap, we have mid, then high for the Manavliaton, and then low for the Veteran Archer, and then mid for the Imperial Crossbowman. So now we jump into tier 5, the top tier of the military of the Imperials. And honestly, it's a really good showing. It's a really strong one. So let's jump through this here with the Imperial Legionary being our first one. And it's just one of the best soldiers. It stacks up so well to everyone, outclassing them in armor, outclassing them in weapon. Here, the Fine Steel Paramirian is a really good weapon length. And on top of it, you've got 2 different sets that both have Colrodic maces, which are really, really, really strong. You have 130 athletics, one-handed, 130 polearm, which is kind of in a funky spot, like we said with the Pilum. And it's the same thing that the veteran infantryman and the trained infantryman kind of suffer. Well, the veteran infantryman suffers from with the Pilum, but it just doesn't matter. That sword is so good. The armor is so good. You compare this to any other character, and they almost always win against other infantry soldiers. And I mean just pure infantry, not like any other 2-handed weapon characters. Those are a very, very different situation. But I think the only one better than the Legionary is the Asterai veteran infantry. So I definitely put the Imperial Legionary on armor and on a skill basis at that high ranking. I think the other one that's kind of sideways comparable to them is the Heavy Spearman. who have almost a comparable amount of armor. They've got a little bit better one-handed, a little bit less athletics, but you're dealing, of course, here with long sword, war sword, which has got a weapon length of 100, and then another long war sword. I think they're really strong comparisons, and in my testing, they were really very close and neck. Into our elite Manavliaton, though, we have that two-handed shock soldier that is just so buttery. 130 athletics, 130 one-handed, and 130 polearm. These, of course, would compare to Palace Guard. They would compare to your veteran Falksman, which are, again, in a really weird position. I would prefer the Falksman over the veteran Falksman. And we also have the heroic Linebreaker. Now, heroic Linebreaker is really, again, I've said this in the Surgeon video, one of the best pound for pound units in the game as far as infantry goes. But the Manavliaton is also very goddamn good. Now, I'm going to be using some of testing information that my good friend Strat Gaming has given me. He did a big battery of testing for 1.9.0, and he shared that with me, kind of showing off some of the testing that he did. And with this, he did a ton of comparisons with the Manavliaton versus a bunch of other characters, and I think there's 30 or 40 tests in this, but they only lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tests. So they are a character that will win against almost any other unit. Even against heroic Linebreakers, they won quite a bit of the time. Oh, there we go. And even though their skills aren't amazing, right? They don't have 150 in one or 100 and whatever in another. And you can hear my dog just scratching the hell out of himself, going at himself like a kid on Christmas. But they've got a lot of really good armor. That Manavlion is so good in its damage profile, and it just has a good length to it too. They really punch hard into some of the other classes out there. The things that they actually won a lot to against were the Volge, which I don't think I've got it here. The Volgier, here we go, which is also a really strong unit, but kind of suffers in a big field engagement. I still think that the two-handed weapon characters are better than they were in the past, and they've kind of just come up on their own through the way that the AI works with them and everything. So I would give a high rating to the Elite Manavliaton as well. Let's move over to some ranged options. So the Veteran Archer was middling in disappointing. The Palatine Guard really does make up for it. Still has a really strong amount of armor here, like a very, very good Legionary mail with reinforced padded mittens and some leather cavalier boots and a great helmet with a round kettle. But we get a Step Warbow, which has 66 damage. This time it is not a crap bow. And we have 2 sets of arrows, 2 sets of Bodkin arrows with 3 pierce damage and 24 stack amount. A very, very good setting with only 1 set too. Quite nice. And they have 140 bow skill. Compare this across the board. The Master Archer does have 160, but he has a slightly less damage bow with piercing arrows doing more damage here. The Master Archer, I think, is the best in class for archers on the standard archer list. Of course, there's the Fian, who's amazing. But Khazate Marksman has a step recurve bow with step arrows, not as much damage as your Palatine Guard with less bow skill, and the Sturgian Veteran Bowman bringing up the caboose here with the 140 bow, and terrible arrows. So I think the Palatine Guard brings your Imperial Veteran Archer from low and brings it up a bit, right? Your Master Archer is a high. This guy is definitely, I'd say, mid, and this guy's low for sure. And this guy, I think, is in that placement between the Master Archer and the Khazate Archer, being a little bit better than the Khazate Archer and not as good as the Master Archer. So I think it's kind of like a mid to high ranking. And it used to be in the past, I gave this a high ranking, and I'm gonna, I think, still stick with a high ranking here. It still is a strong character, it still has a lot of strong things to offer. It's had a lot of weird, it lost one of its quivers at one point and got it back, so it still kind of retains that in my opinion. Next is our Bucellarii, the only ranged mounted horse archer here. All those words didn't make sense, but it's the horse archer for the Empire with 140 bow, 120 riding, 100 athletics, and 130 one-handed. We have a step recurve bow here, which is not bad at all, with barbed arrows, unfortunately, are not so great archer things here. But looking at our marksman down into the heavy horse archer, we have that as a comparison point. Heavy horse archer has 130 bow, 130 riding, 130 one-handed with 80 athletics, a step recurve bow as well, but step arrows doing a little bit more damage here, and really good armor with mirrored brigandine armor. So it's a comparable character. It used to be that I would give this guy a low rating, but they have gotten much better across the board. The bow is about on par with the Khazate, and their arrows are not that much less damage than Khazate. So I think that they've just kind of been balanced out a little bit, and I would give this character a mid up from the low it had before. I think, though, the problem is that a lot of people are going to struggle to find a use for this character over either the Palatine Guard or the Sergeant Crossbowman. So if I'm thinking about this from an army composition standpoint, I think that there's too many options for ranged in the Imperial Army that this character just kind of falls to the wayside. And if I'm going to use my horses, I'm going to use them on a visual recruit. Is this a war horse? Yeah, I'm going to use the war horses to upgrade my cataphracts. I'm not going to bother with a war horse on this character. I'd rather just go grab a Khazate character, since if I'm playing like the Northern or Southern Empire where I've got Khazate right on my border. So I think that's what kind of makes this character, if we're comparing them from horse archer to horse archer, it's a mid rank. If I'm looking at it from the army composition standpoint, I think it retains its old former low rank, because it just feels so weirdly out of place by comparison. A lot of people swear by this unit. I think it's a great unit. I think it's really cool. I think it adds that level of like variety that the Imperial Army has, which makes the Imperial Army so cool. So just kind of take this with a grain of salt when it comes to my low rating from an army composition standpoint. That's like my subjective opinion, objective opinion, whichever one. I can't remember. But our last unit here is the Imperial Sergeant Crossbowman, which, depending on who you talk to, is the best unit in the game, period. But we're looking at the Vlandian Sharpshooter by a comparison point. The Vlandian Sharpshooter has 130, 130, 130 with a good bound crossbow and heavy bolts. It's just the pinnacle of crossbow soldier with great armor across the board. Our Imperial Sergeant Crossbowman still has amazing armor and still has great stats. The Hickory crossbow is not as good, and the heavy corals are not as good as either. It does have a reinforced iron-rimmed kite shield, which is nice. The sharpshooter, though, still having that nice Pava shield, which is amazing. So, a very nice character, a very good one. I'm going to keep it at mid just because the Vlandian sharpshooter is a high rank, and I don't think it supplants the sharpshooter or is as level of like competitive by comparison. Still keep in mind, though, that the way I use archers compared to crossbows is that I like crossbows in a larger number than archers. If I only have 10 range units, I want 10 archers. If I have 50 range units, I want 50 crossbows. So kind of balance your archer crossbow with that kind of mindset, saying, okay, I want to go hard in the paint on crossbows. Crossbows in high quantity are amazing. Now, our noble line for the Imperials is quite exotic, is quite fun, because we have the Cataphract, a very awesome unit. Now, it starts as an Imperial Visual Recruit, which is just an infantry soldier, but if I compare this to the Otruk, which is the Sturdian counterpart, it has 60 one-handed and actually has a polearm to take advantage of. So I think that that's kind of nice here. A little bit more variety here with comparable amount of one-handed skill. So I give this a high rating compared to the Otruk. Now into the Equite, we get our actual horse unit. Remember, you will require a horse to upgrade into the Equite, which is kind of a pain in the ass versus say like the Ferris or the Noble Son. Both just start on a horse, which is kind of nice. The Equite, though, is got a really nice set of skills, 70 riding, 70 one-handed, and 100 polearm. But if I compare that to the Vlandian Gallant, they've got 70 riding, 100 one-handed, 100 polearm with better armor. So I'd give the Imperial Equite a mid rank by comparison to that. So again, high, then mid. Then into our heavy horsemen, we get a big daddy. 110 riding, 110 one-handed, 150 polearm. So I think that that's the Vlandian Knight. Yeah, the Vlandian Knight, who's got 100, 100, 110. So you can see it really starts to take off with the Heavy Horseman. The Heavy Horseman is a really strong unit. It's really, really strong. He seems to really outclass everyone at tier 4. And I find that I find more Heavy Horsemen than I do Cataphract and Imperial Cataphract, or Elite Cataphracts in the AI's army, because they just are so good. Now, I'm not saying the AI is withstanding upgrading them. I think that they get to the Heavy Horsemen, they just do a bunch of punching power, and then they don't jump into the Cataphract or Elite Cataphract for whatever reason, but they're still really strong in where they are here. With a really good lance here, or a fine steel spear, a great shield, a great sword. Definitely put this as a high rank in that position. So high, mid, high on those rankings. And then to the Imperial Cataphract, we jump into even more armor with 130, 130, 160 in riding, one-handed, and polearm. Comparing this to the champion now, the Valondian champion, we're looking at 130, 130, 160. So now things get very comparable between the two, with almost a comparable amount of armor, but definitely the Imperials eking out just a little bit above the competition. So I would put the Imperial Cataphract at a high. Now our last one is the Elite Cataphract with 200, 200, 260. Comparing this to the Banner Knight, we have a character that has 200, 220, 260. And the armor doesn't change much from Champion to Banner Knight, whereas the Elite Cataphract just gets heavier and harder to kill. And I think that that's why I keep the Elite Cataphract at a high rank no matter what, because it has just such great survivability. It loses 21-handed, but it still retains enough punching power to do quite a bit of damage. I mean, it has a Fine Steel Paramirian, it has a Corsair Lance, which is braceable and extremely long, and it's got a Knight's Kite Shield. It's a great unit. It's amazing to see on the battlefield, and it is like the perfect accompaniment to your entire Imperial army. It doesn't lack any kind of cohesion or any kind of synergy that sometimes the noble lines can for whatever reason. So definitely have a high ranking here. So to recap one more time, we have a high, mid, high, high, high rank for our noble line. Let's close this out by reviewing the entire Imperial army. So the Imperial roster has changed with so many different additions to the armies across the board, balancing, all that kind of fun stuff. Trained infantrymen losing a lot of their armor, all these things. And it's kind of changed the dynamic of the early Imperial army, but still the late Imperial army is very strong and very diverse. You go from what used to just be high all the way down, from a mid to a high Imperial legionary. He's just 420 blasting. Then a Manavliaton, which has still retained its very strong ranking. The Palatine Guard it shifted a lot during the early access, but still holds that high rank. Buslarii jumping a little bit up because I think it gained some skill as well as an entire quiver going into mid. Our Imperial Sergeant Crossbowmen and Crossbowmen maintain their mid rank before, but that Imperial trained infantry soldier or Imperial trained archer dropping into low. So the Imperial army is great. It's really strong, it's really good, it's really diverse, and on top of it, like I've said before, it has the highest availability of any army in the game because you can get them anywhere pretty much. And on top of that, their noble line is pretty easy to jump into because there is a lot of castles for you to recruit those noble lines from. So with that being said, I think the Imperial army is in a really good position, better than it has been before, because it did kind of shift wildly when they tried to do a lot of balancing to it. I don't think it's as balanced as some of the other armies, which we'll go into, but I still think it's in a really good position here, and it just goes to show that, like, you have at the end of the line at the tier 5, it's like you can go wrong with near nothing in the army, and I think that's a nice reward for making a unit go from recruit all the way up to whatever specialization you want them to be in your army, to not be a bad person within that rank, within that class, which is, I think, a really cool reward. But go ahead and let me know in the comment section below. Did you have terrible luck using an Elite Manavliaton? Are you using just an army of Imperial Sergeant Crossbowmen and just disregarding everything else because they're just chads? Whatever it is, let me know in the comment section below, and let me know which one you want me to do next. I think the next one I might do might be Britannia, or any other guides you want me to cover. Please, by all means, share any information you've got, because it always helps out anyone brand new to the game. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one, and take care.